All right, next subject this morning is we're going to talk about dates and doing date arithmetic and that sort of stuff. So on the next tab over, dates. Okay. Now then, thing you have to understand here is it uses a computer trick that all computing systems use. Today's date happens to be 9/6/2013. Okay. In fact, there's a function called today that simply asks the computer what the day is, and it drops that in there. So that's how that showed up there. Okay. But what's really stored in that cell is not that, but this number that's right underneath it. And see, all I did there was I pointed back to that cell that has today's date in it, and I told it to turn formatting off. Okay. So Excel sees today as, why did it do that? Shouldn't do that. 41,523. Okay. What it's done is it picked an arbitrary starting point on the calendar system, and it keeps track of dates by the number of days that have elapsed since that starting point. Excel uses January 1st, 1900. So since that point up to today, there's been 41,523 days. Okay. So this is the first time we've come across the difference between what's called the stored value, that's what's actually stored in that cell, and the display value. Just like when you were working on that finance stuff and you typed in 2%, what was really stored there was 0.02. So there's a difference between what you see and what's actually stored there. This is probably the most dramatic case of the difference between the two. But by doing that, it allows us to calculate how old people are, how long it took to do something, and all that sort of stuff, because all we're doing is basically subtracting one number from the other. And that'll give us the number of days, and if we want to convert that to years, we would, what? Huh? How many days in a year? 365, right? Okay. So if we wanted to turn that into years, we would just divide that 41,000 whatever by 365, and that would give us roughly how many years. Now, it's not quite right because there's a bunch of leap years in there, so we probably should divide by 365.25, which is a much closer approximation because there's a quarter day in each year, and that's why we have leap years and all that sort of stuff. Which brings me to my next point. Excel understands leap years. The real rule for leap years, most people don't realize, is if it's divisible by 4, it is, but if it's divisible by 100, it's not, but if it's divisible by 400, it is, but if it's divisible by 1,000, it's not. Because it's not exact, it's like 365.23 yada, yada, yada years old for days, right? So the Pope way back when figured this, he had some mathematicians get together and they figured out that crazy thing. That's why the year 2000 was not a leap year, because it was divisible by 2000. Anyway, Excel knows all that sort of stuff, so it'll take care of all that stuff for you. And it figured that out and all that sort of stuff. So that's that. Now, there are some nice functions. If I need to pull out from this is called a date string here, this 9/6/2013. If I just need the day, there's a function that'll grab that for me. And there's one that'll grab the month, which is the nice one, and there's one that'll just take the year. Sometimes we want to break this up. When we want to create pivot tables, when we want to analyze the data on, say, a year-by-year basis or a month-by-month basis, and we've got a whole series of dates like that, and we just care about the year or the month or whatever, we can pull that stuff apart. You can put your dates in a lot of different ways. You can do like 12/12/2012, which would be December 12th from last year, and it'll, what did I type in? Oh, 1. Let's try that again, like that. You can do stuff like, let's see, this is the 9th month, so you could go 9, I think this works, 2013. And stuff like that. It understands all that sort of stuff for you. It's really good about dates, so you don't have to think much about them. In fact, you can just do them how you would normally think about them. You don't have to stop and think about them. Okay. It can also do autofill. Notice here I've got a week between those two dates. Right? And then if I want to create a whole column of weekly dates, I just do that. And of course, it's not quite big enough here, so we can just make this column a little bit bigger. There we go. And it even, like, it knows that September has 30 days in it, so it'll adjust the thing. So it just won't automatically add 7 days and go on. And so it'll do all this stuff. And if it's a leap year, it'll understand that, and it'll take care of all that sort of stuff for you. You can do, since, you know, businesses do a lot of stuff on the quarter basis, it understands that. I said, all I had there was Q1 and Q2, and I did an autofill and went Q1, 2, 3, 4, and then went back to 1 again. If I were to do the same for months, it'll knows the months, and it'll roll back over again. And of course, days of the week, it'll do the same sort of thing. Okay. So we can use the autofill feature in lots of different places on dates, and it works just fine. So if I wanted to calculate, let's say something happened a year ago, let's say July 8th of 2012. So I would just go 8/12/2002. Okay. And I wanted to figure out how many days it's been since that, whatever happened on that date. Then I could do two things here. I could put today's date here, and I could either type it in, or I could say equals today. Open, close parentheses. All functions must have a set of parentheses. Even if you don't have to put anything inside the parentheses, you still need the parentheses. And there's today's date. And then I just have to simply subtract one from the other. So over here, I could just say equals today's date minus that date that I carefully recorded for whatever purposes. And I get that number, 390. So there's been 390 days since July, no, that's 8, that would be August, right? Yeah, August 12th of last year. Okay. Now, all we're doing here is we're just doing this, right? Just to make sure that everybody's clear. Look, I just pointed back to that cell. I just said equals in the cell above it. And then these two cells down here, I'm going to turn formatting off so you can see that again. Okay. Those 41,000 numbers, that's what's actually stored in that cell. But we told it, the Excel, to format it into something that makes sense to us. So it's easy enough to subtract, see how you can just subtract one of these from the other and come up with the number of elapsed days. Questions about that? Yes? For that, well, you would just see up here where it says general, and then just come down here and pick short date would be the quickest way to do it if you wanted them back on. Or you could just do undo if you haven't gone anywhere, you know. Okay? Now then, there's one small quirk that will cop up from time to time. Especially if you have lots of dates on the spreadsheet. When you do something, it looks at the cells around it, and it sees if they're mostly dates. It says, oh, you probably want this as a date, so it'll go ahead and format it as a date automatically. So sometimes you'll get this. When you're doing date arithmetic, and it shows, and your answer shows up as that, sometimes you'll get an answer that looks like that. And it says January 24th, 1901, which happens to be the 390th day in the Excel calendar. So if you're doing a date arithmetic and you get an answer that returns a date, then all you really have to do here is just clear the format out, and you'll get the number that you're expecting to see. Okay. Easy enough, right? So we can do this is how we can figure out if somebody was 21 years old, if they worked for the company 20 years, all those sorts of data arithmetic stuff that we typically do in a business are very easy to do here. All right? Time works in a similar fashion. Hours of the day. There's another function called now that returns the date and the time. So down here, I've got the date, and then it's 9/17. 9:17. Oh, 9:37. Sorry. Okay. That's the displayed value. What's stored in that cell is this number right here. So again, I'm just referring to the cell above it, and I turned the formatting off so you can see what the stored value is. And see, then it tried to, as soon as I moved off of it, it formatted it for me because it thought that's what I really wanted. But no, thank you. All right, so 41,523.40227. Well, the 41,000, we know what that is. That's the date, as Excel keeps it. The 0.40 represents the fraction of a 24-hour day that this exact moment represents. Okay, so we're about a little over 4/10 of the way through a day. If this was noon, that would be 0.5, and so on. Does that make sense? So it stores the time component as a fraction of a 24-hour day, the decimal fraction. So, and then you can do elapsed time, and you can do, again, if we have two different times, then we can do arithmetic. All right, just so you know, there's a hour function that extracts the hour from something, and this will extract the minutes from something, just like the day, month, year, did that sort of stuff. Sometimes you just want part of that time string. Okay. So to do, let's say something. Let's say we start. Well, we started class at 8:30 this morning, right? So I could go 8:32, say. And then if I wanted to make that PM, I could type PM there, or I can type. Let's see. If I don't do that, I think it assumes that it's AM. Yep. So if you just type in 8:32, it thinks you're talking about 8:32 AM. And see, right now it's roughly 9:40, so I'll put 9:40 in there. Okay. And again, remember, what's being stored there is this stuff. Let me just do this one more time, so this is clear to everybody what's in there. Okay. It's those decimal fractions. So then to calculate the elapsed time, I could just simply say, 9:40 minus the earlier time, like that, returns an answer like that, 1 hour and 8 minutes. See, it actually went through and figured that out for you automatically. But again, if I copy that over like that, it says that elapsed time was 0.04 something. So that's 0.04 of a day, which works out to be an hour. Does that make sense here? So again, and it'll understand midnight, and it'll roll things around and figure. It'll do all that sort of stuff. So actually, if you have something that goes over 2 days, then it'll say days, hours, minutes, and stuff like that when you do the calculations. All right. So just remember, it stores things as a number, and it displays them in something you want. Now, one last thing, just so you know. Generally doesn't bother business people too much, but things get weird if you try to work on dates before 1900. And then you have to go through some special handling routines. I'm not going to talk about them here because almost nobody here is ever going to worry about a date before 1900. Okay, just so you know. All right, so moving along here on P3, practice 3. There's a date of birth, 2 date of births. Why do I have 2 date of births? Oh, this is the unformatted value, and that's the formatted value there. I just put them side by side. I think that's right. Yeah. So I want you to calculate that person's age, and then figure out which day of the week they were born on, and what month they were born in, and what their birth year was. And put those in those separate columns, and then there's something over there to do with elapsed time. Another thing over there. All right? Okay, go ahead. Start working on it.